Thank you. As a native Texan, it's great to be here in Austin. I'm so grateful. And I want to thank Rick and MAPS for inviting me to come talk about the work that Heffter Research Institute has been doing with psilocybin. So this is our website and our homepage. And I want to talk about what we've done, what we're doing now, and what we want to do next. So this is our website, and up at the top says our research. And if you go to that page, it leads you eventually to the list of all our studies that have been published. So we have sections. This is the cancer section. All the cancer patients studies been published with us, including the number 4 and 5 are the most recent ones with cancer patients with end-of-life emotional distress, anxiety, and depression. And those studies led to Usona Institute going into the phase 3 studies for depression through the FDA to get FDA approval for depression. The next section is addiction and then some obsessive-compulsive disorder. So we started out with these in reverse order, ketamine a long time ago, but more recently smoking and alcohol addiction. Then the next, spirituality. These are done with people without mental illness, but all the aspects of spirituality and how it improves quality of health, etc. And then we have a very long section on neuroscience. Most of this is done at the University of Zurich in Switzerland by Dr. Franz Vollenweider and his team, and then the new member of that team, new leader of it, Dr. Katrin Preller. And I'll be telling you about the studies she's going to do. So just to sort of show off here, we have this page, a lot of neuroscience studies. Okay, now I want to take you through our recent studies that we think are important. This is the data from the Johns Hopkins cancer study, and the NYU data looks basically the same. So let's take the top left corner, the beginning of the study, that's their depression scores, which are high. And then the second lines, you see the red line goes way down below the blue line. The blue line, they got the placebo first. The red line got psilocybin first. And you can see the red people's depression scores drop way lower than the people in blue. But they had therapy before, so that helped. And then at the third point, the blue line people got psilocybin, and the red line people got the placebo. So the blue line depression goes down where the red line people are. And then that continues for up to 6 months. Their depression stays down for up to 6 months. And this is a few hours of therapy before and after, 1 dose of psilocybin, and depression improved for 6 months. And there's another depression scale, the Beck inventory, similar pattern, hospital anxiety, depression scale, depression, similar pattern, anxiety, trait anxiety, state anxiety, brief symptom inventory, which is a lot of psychiatric symptoms, and then positive scales, quality of life goes up with the red group first, and then the blue group comes up a little more, and then death acceptance, way up for the red group first, and then up for the blue group. So that's what's called a crossover study. This is a study, this is a table of response in terms of depression and remission. So response is like the depressive symptoms are improved, but there's still a problem. Remission is where we consider the patient is basically well, is not depression, is not interfering with their lives. So this is after the first dose. You can see the high dose group, much more both response and remission for depression, and also for anxiety at the bottom two graphs. Again, a single dose of psilocybin, 6 months improvement. So one of the things that was measured in this is mystical experience. And what does that mean? Well, there are many kinds of mystical experience in the mystical literature. So this is one model of it. And there's actually, these are the questions, and you get a score, so it can be measured quantitatively for statistical analysis. So the first section is mystical type qualities, a feeling of internal unity, freedom from limitations of your personal self, feeling you're at one with yourself and one with an inner world within yourself. External unity, you feeling at one with your environment, the whole world, or that all is one. And then a noetic quality, feeling that you gained insight into some basic nature of reality or nature about yourself or consciousness. And finally, a feeling of sacredness. It's just this feeling that you feel this is a sacred experience. And this is the person's own meaning of sacred. The next area is positive mood, which is pretty self-explanatory. You just feel good, sense of amazement, etc. Transcendence of time and space. This is a person might feel that they're in there's only eternity, there's only now, the normal flow of time, they're not perceiving it that way. Space, they might feel their body is expanded, or don't feel their body at all, and that there's no spatial limits. And finally, ineffability, meaning simply you cannot put this in words to give an adequate description of it. So they took these scores on this mysticism scale, mystic MEQ scale, and they did correlations. So Rick earlier showed you that for PTSD, a mystical experience for the MDMA did not show a correlation. But PTSD and depression are completely different animals, and of course psilocybin and MDMA are very different. So the top two graphs, personally meaningful, so on the horizontal is the mystical experience score, the vertical is the personally meaningful score, so a strong correlation to that, which is not surprising. 0.77, 1.0 is a perfect correlation. Spiritually significant, also very positive. But what's most interesting to us is that the degree of mystical experience correlated with the decrease in anxiety and depression. Not as strongly, but the decrease in anxiety was 0.59, and decrease in depression was 0.36. So what's exciting to me is it shows that, possibly a mystical experience is part of the mechanism of action of the benefit of psilocybin used with this kind of therapy. The other study I want to talk about is, this is a study with smokers. 15 smokers, a pilot study, and for all 15 on the left, they were smoking about 17 cigarettes a day on average, and at the end, at 6 months, they were smoking about 3 cigarettes a day. Now, 12 of these people at 6 months had no evidence of current smoking at all. They were abstinent. So the 3 who were still smoking occasionally, their average was down from like 20 cigarettes a day to 13 cigarettes a day. And this is far, far greater improvement than any available treatment for smoking. The next one, this is a similar study with alcoholics. There were only 10 subjects in a pilot study. So at the beginning, the first line is when they start. The second point is after their first psilocybin session, after therapy. And so you can see that the lines are going down for number of drinking days in blue and number of heavy drinking days in red. And then after their first psilocybin session, it drops dramatically, both drinking days and heavy drinking days. And then pretty much stays in that level up to about over 6 months. So one of the main outcomes is the heavy drinking days is about 35 at the beginning and about 12 at the end. So about a 2/3 reduction in heavy drinking days. And this was the smoking and alcohol study. Smoking actually had 3 psilocybin sessions, alcohol had 2. So that's what we've done. This is what we're doing right now ongoing. At NYU, the double-blind trial of psilocybin-assisted treatment for alcohol dependence. So this is 100 subjects. It's the largest single psychedelic study that's been done ever, probably. And it's about 80% through. And there's a placebo group. They get Benadryl. They get 2 sessions. And then the other group gets psilocybin with lots of therapy focused on alcohol dependence. At the end of 6 months, everybody has the opportunity to take psilocybin. So if you're in the placebo group, you still get to have a psilocybin treatment. At Johns Hopkins, similar to the smoking treatment, is going into double blind with nicotine patch versus psilocybin. And the pilot was so successful, they're only doing 1 psilocybin session for this. And it's also about 80% through, because it's not blinded, it's looking very well in terms of the outcome. At Johns Hopkins also is finishing up a study on the effects of psilocybin on behavior, psychology, and brain function in long-term meditators. So meditators who have a long practice, they meditate on psilocybin, and a low dose, they do that in a fMRI scanner, and learn, how does it affect the brain, how does it affect their meditation, and how does it affect their meditation practice. At Yale is a fairly new center for us. They're studying obsessive-compulsive disorder in a placebo-controlled study, which has just begun, and also a mechanistic study about neuroplasticity in the treatment of depression, because all psychedelics and MDMA cause neuroplasticity or rewiring. And it's looking at how does psilocybin, this brain effect, affect depression, to understand biologically what happens with that. University of Zurich, after all their sort of neuroscience research, are going into patients, depressed patients, looking at the clinical, neurocognitive, and emotional effects. University of Alabama at Birmingham, treatment of cocaine use. This is really interesting because we talked about people of color. I think many or most of the subjects there are African American, and not only that, but of lower socioeconomic status, maybe not much education. And interesting, they're playing the same music playlist of classical music used at Johns Hopkins, but these subjects are having full mystical experiences, getting off cocaine, turning their lives around, and it's very, very inspiring. And finally, University of Wisconsin, just starting now, a phase 1 study of safety and effects of psilocybin opiate in adults with opioid use disorder, opioid addiction, maintain on Suboxone, which is a combination of buprenorphine and naloxone. So with opioids, it's tricky because if people get clean and have an accidental relapse, they could accidentally overdose and die. So the buprenorphine naloxone prevents them from that happening. So this is a safety study, other drug interactions with that. So we have a lot going on and very excited about all of it. So next, this is a study proposed by Dr. Preller in Zurich, and actually Dr. Preller will be here in Austin at South by Southwest in the spring talking about her work at that conference. So mechanistic and clinical studies into psilocybin-assisted therapy optimization. So basically, the therapeutic method used in all psychedelic research has essentially been the same since it was discovered by Dr. Stanislav Grof in the late 1950s. So it's been about 60 years when the therapy has just been the same. It involves listening to instrumental music with headphones and eye shades, with the instructions to just let everything happen, go with it, or surrender to the process, whether it's depression, addiction, OCD, same instruction. That's it. That's the therapy method. But because different kinds of mental illness respond to different kinds of therapy, we think psilocybin-assisted therapy methods could be developed that are more specific to the diagnosis. And so these specific methods will be based on methods that are already validated for disorders by neuroscientific evidence from the more recent decades, because there was very little neuroscience 60 years ago, no scanning, et cetera. And these have come from assessing brain function, EEG, neuroimaging, that were just not available back then. So what is neuroplasticity? This is a diagram that shows you at the top is a graphical abstract of a nerve cell and then a little axon blow up, and you see the little side chains, dendrites, and then the big ones are sort of neuroreceptors. And you give a psychoplastinogen, which are basically all psychedelics and MDMA. Here it has LSD, but psilocybin does this too. So the nerve cell has more axons, more branches, and more little spines, and more synapses forming as a result of just taking the drug. This happens in animals. So this is essentially a rewiring of the brain. So it's key for learning and adapting. So forgetting patterns that hopefully are not adaptive, and learning patterns that help you adapt. And it's generally impaired in psychiatric disorders. So the potential for doing this has never been investigated. So this is exploratory research, which is exciting. And Heffter's mission is really to do things that would never be funded by government or anything, to do cutting edge stuff. So we're able to get back to that. So it'll begin to assess whether more specific methods can result in increased neuroplasticity. So does the brain training of the method increase neuroplasticity and improve the effect, the benefit of the treatment? So how is this going to work? So there are a couple of markers in neuroplasticity. You can't get brain cells out of a human brain to see what it looks like. So these markers, a brain-derived neurotropic factor is a marker for neuroplasticity. And then there's evidence from transcranial magnetic stimulation with EEG can show that neuroplasticity is happening. So they'll measure that before and after the interventions. So the three kind of interventions that Dr. Preller wants to look at are first memory recall and extension. So you want to extinguish or forget traumatic or addiction-related memories. And we want to see if psilocybin can accelerate that. So improves the forgetting of memories of trauma, that perpetuate intrusive thoughts about the trauma, and memories of addictive substance use, craving, I want to use again, that compulsive thinking in addiction that triggers the desire to use it more, and the ruminative thoughts with depression, like I'm no good, I'm hopeless, that loop, negative loop that keeps playing. So can that be accelerated? The second, neurofeedback training for emotional regulation. So there is neurofeedback training now to help people regulate emotions. It's feedback from their EEG, but it takes about 30 sessions to show a benefit from that treatment. So we want to see, can psilocybin accelerate that, make it more effective with fewer sessions? And the third method is computer-assisted learning. So this is used now for a variety of mental illnesses. So one way is to teach people, train people to have more empathy in social interactions. It's like a social skill to do that. And also to improve their cognitive processing of information, which helps in their functioning, their work, but also in conversation with things. So once we find out, hopefully, that some of these techniques are improved with psilocybin in healthy, normal people, we want to take the things that worked, and then treat people with mental disorders using what we've learned from this. And so we're thinking of alcoholism was the first thing, but it could be any mental disorder because they all have different therapies, and psilocybin potentially could help them all because it's already helping them all with just sort of one-size-fits-all therapy. And then future possibilities, there are virtual reality therapies for phobias and PTSD, and psilocybin might help that, or in the use of handheld devices for assessing improvement. Depressed people don't move much, so you can assess their improvement there. So this has been fairly technical talk, and just in an homage to Austin filmmaking, I hope that you're feeling a little better than this person. I'm not saying you don't know what you're talking about, but I don't know what you're talking about. But instead, I hope you get the message from this, of really this whole conference, and the purpose of this research is this: just wake up. Okay, thank you very much, and open for questions. So, questions? Raise your hand here in the front here.
Thank you very much. This is a personal question for a loved one interested in psilocybin therapy. I know that these individuals are typically screened out at the beginning of these studies, but I was wondering if you could touch on the risk to anyone who has experienced psychosis in their past.
A lot of echo. So you're asking about the risks of psychosis with psilocybin?
Yes, this person did experience psychosis in the past many decades ago. To my knowledge, there's no sign of schizophrenia or any marker such as that, but it's something that I'd like to pick your brain on.
Okay. I'm sorry, there's a lot of echo, but basically, people who have a history, either themselves or sometimes even their immediate family members, a history of either a psychotic episode or a manic episode, or excluded from MDMA and psilocybin and psychedelic research because it could trigger that kind of problem. So research is not done with those subjects, and there's a small, a couple of percent of the population, or a very low percent, that are at risk. So that's why we caution people who contact us, don't try this at home. You need to really be screened by professional mental health people who know how to diagnose mental illness, take a history, and so that's just the way it is for safety first. I'm not sure I answered all of your question. Was there more to that, or? Okay. More questions? Yeah, go ahead.
What doses are they usually using?
Yeah, the psilocybin, mostly it's about 25 milligrams, which is roughly equivalent to, say, 5 grams of dried mushrooms. In the alcohol study, they found that they weren't having a strong experience, a lot of the alcoholics, so they had the option to go up to 40 milligrams of psilocybin. And then there's been some research just testing the pharmacokinetics that went up to like 60 milligrams. And those people, it was very intense, but it was safe, and they did fine. But 25 milligrams, so it's a lie down. People, they can say, hold my hand, or I need to go to the bathroom, or they can't really engage in conversation during that peak experience, which is very different from MDMA because people are cognitively intact. They can have normal conversation and interactive. And of course, PTSD is a very different animal from depression because they have their trauma that involves verbal, talking about it, remembering, and communicating. So the MDMA therapy is very much more complex, and much more training is needed to do MDMA than psilocybin therapy for depression.
Hey,
Yes.
Dr. Greer, thanks for the talk. My name's Anthony. It was a technical talk, but for those of us on the front lines of medicine, it's probably one of the most transformative therapies that we can see. We all want to improve people's compassion and make people better people, but the alcohol and the tobacco is what's going to change the world, certainly from the point of view of frontline medicine, frontline emergency services, frontline policing. So it's incredibly exciting. I had a couple of little...
Echo here. Maybe just turn off the microphone and just talk loudly, and I think I can hear you better. Okay. Or come up the front and, yeah. And I'll repeat your question so everybody can hear it. Okay. Okay, yeah, so he's asking in the psilocybin trials what percentage of people would experience a strong mystical experience. I think it's around 80% at that dose, 75, 80% would have sort of a score of like 75 or 80 on that mystical experience scale, which they considered a full mystical experience. So the vast majority, but not everybody. Not yet, but that's something that we want to look at, and actually in the Dr. Preller study that I just talked about, they're going to do genetic testing to test the genetics for the serotonin receptors. Can be different kinds based on your genes and different polymorphisms, and does that determine who has a more psilocybin effect than others? Is it just genetics, or what is it? And I think Johns Hopkins is planning research, and there's been a little bit done on, personality characteristics that promote people who have a more beneficial experience versus those who don't. But there's no really good data about that yet.
Just one question on neuroplasticity. What's the time frame are you talking about for actual neuronal growth?
So that's a good question. Most people think, you take this psilocybin, there's probably a couple of days window where it's facilitating this neuroplasticity, where it's happening. And so the study is going to be half the group will get the training effect on the day of psilocybin during it, and the other half will get it a day later, because you don't know if it's going to be more effective given with psilocybin, or it might be more effective the day later. We don't know, so we're going to find out. And then they're going to measure the neuroplasticity effects 2 weeks after that. So that's the way the study is designed, based on what's known now. But this is going into the unknown where we've never gone. So we'll see.
So maybe structural change within only 2 weeks.
Yes. Yeah. That's the theory based on animal studies, et cetera. What happens with animals? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for coming up.
Hi. You mentioned a standard playlist of your classical music. Is that available? Do you have it on Spotify?
So I probably so Johns Hopkins is they're dealing with music that was used in the 1970s in Baltimore when Stan Groff and other people were doing research. And there's a therapist, Bill Richards, who was working with Groff in the 70s, who's still doing it now. So that's carried over, and you'd have to. We can find out. Johns Hopkins might know, but if you just send a contact email to Heffter Institute and mention my name, I can try to find out. But basically, it's mostly Western, classical, romantic classical music. That's sort of most of it. But then they have some more contemporary music, ethnic music, and on one sense, people obsess about the playlist a lot, but in some ways, it doesn't matter. So our time's up, but.
I was just going to say, my experience with holotropic breathing, and I've had 2 psilocybin experiences, the music really matters.
Yeah, the music does matter, and all kinds work. Listen, thank you very much, and thank you.